But I was wondering kind of what your thoughts are on how the Japanese education system could be improved in that regard, like from your own experiences or from your own wishes.
Mm. Um, so okay, so as a disclaimer, this is my personal opinion as an outsider to the Japanese education system. So I never attended a Japanese school growing up, right? So this is my perspective as like an outsider. But I do personally believe that there's definitely much room for improvement, and the whole system just needs to be completely overhauled. Um, and there are several reasons. The first one is bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is the biggest enemy to progress in education today. And um, the Ministry of Education is the one that's deciding on educational content here in Japan. So, in other words, you need approval from the ministry in order for a school to use curriculum and for the teachers to teach it to the students. So, it's a very highly centralized system. And of course, those who work currently in the ministry are oftentimes those who did well in the system, in the current system, and got the high entrance level exams that they needed to get into the right universities that got them the positions in the education ministry. So they don't really see a need to change the system because they themselves are the products of its success.
Mm.
Number two is that very much so still in Japan, even in 2021, there's this one test that determines one's fate in life, and it's the college entrance examinations. Um, but then, those tests are only geared towards certain types of learners. So those who are blessed with, I guess, auditory or oral learning abilities, um, those will obviously do well when it comes to test taking because they can digest information, remember it, and be able to just kind of spit it out, regurgitate it when a test is given to them. But how about those kinesthetic learners? What about the social learner? What about the visual learner? Right? All these different types of learners are currently falling between the cracks, I would say. So currently we have a broken system. Um, and the definition of education in countries like the US is a little bit more wider because the federal government doesn't really decide the content of education. And I was very fortunate that, I went through the whole international education system. And when I applied to college, yes, I did have one like college entrance exam like test, which is called the SATs, the Scholastic Assessment Test.
Mm.
But that's just one component of your overall assessment, right? You still had to write an essay. You still had to partake in extracurricular activities, which were evaluated by the college admissions people. Your personal character was also vouched for by your counselor and also one of your teachers. So it's a very holistic view on an individual, whereas in Japan, it's just one test, right? And if you have a bad day and if you fail that test, then you're pretty much screwed.
Mm.
So these are really really big issues that I really think that not just Japan but also other Confucian-based countries need to really fix because it's inappropriate for the 21st century.
From what I see here in Germany, for example, that sometimes this digital education lies in the wrong ministries. So, for example,
Mm,
we have people who are in charge of digitalizing education or digitalizing administration, for example, so that there is less bureaucracy or to make it more accessible for people.
mm,
But in the end, these people are actually not in charge of education or
mm,
so there's a clear differentiation between the person who is in charge of just bringing the country forward when it comes to digitization and the
mm.
people actually where it matters. So, for example, culturally, education, those are all separate two things, two entities.
Right,
And
right.
the ones who are in charge of education, they don't think about the digital implications they could use in order to improve the system, for example.
Right.
Now, as you said, they might not be interested because they are the product of or the product of the system, and they are the ones who benefited the most from it.
Right.
That's definitely true. But I find that is a very essential point, so that it becomes kind of a topic in each ministry, but also for each person who is in charge to actually, for example, reinvent the education in Japan.
Mm, mm, mm. Right. No, those are all, yeah, those are all really important points there. And if I may add one more thing, I think that we should also, we should never forget about pedagogy. So not just the what, but the how in which you teach to kids. Because as both of you may have experienced during your time here in Japan, but the majority of the population here are very they have what is called allergy, or like they have this allergic reaction when it comes to English, in that sometimes they even know how to speak it, but they never, they're so afraid to use it, right? And I think that, we really have to be careful about this, because my biggest sort of concern is that um, we're going to make the same mistake that we made with English when it comes to coding education here in Japan. So making students remember functions like mindlessly, right?
Mhm.
Just like how in English lessons, Japanese students were forced to remember meaningless phrases like this is a pen, like this is a pen, and also like overburning them with like complex grammatical rules that you never really need to know, right? Like I think it's really important for us to remember that English, just like how English is a language, program is also a language, and a language can only be learned through practice and use, and by trialing and failing and learning. So I really hope that we don't make the same mistake when it comes to, yeah, coding education here in Japan, just like what we did with English.
Yeah.